Most people come up to me after over 200 shows. They'll say the scene I remember most is when you and Archie discussed the how you put socks and shoes on.
For 8 years, they shared the same living room. Same set, same cameras, same audience of millions. On screen, they were Archie Bunker and Meathead, a stubborn old man and a loudmouth young liberal, always arguing, always clashing, always one insult away from an explosion. But behind the cameras, people noticed something, a chill, a tension that went beyond the script. Carol O'Connor, by some accounts, had a problem with Rob Reiner, a real one, and for decades, nobody could fully explain why. Now, in the wake of one of Hollywood's most devastating tragedies, the answer has finally come into focus, and it is not the one anyone expected. Stay with us that on December 14th, 2025, emergency responders arrive at a home in Brentwood, California. Inside, they found 2 people dead. Rob Reiner, the actor, the director, the man who had spent over 50 years building one of the most celebrated careers in Hollywood history, had been stabbed to death in his own home. His wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, was found beside him. She was gone too. Their daughter, Romy, had discovered them. Within hours, police arrested the couple's son, Nick Reiner. He was 32 years old. He had battled substance abuse and mental illness for most of his adult life. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The news spread through Hollywood like a shockwave. Tributes poured in from Billy Crystal, Martin Scorsese, Larry David, Albert Brooks, people who had known Rob Reiner for decades. Billy Crystal stood at the podium of the 2026 Academy Awards and wept. Meg Ryan stood behind him. So did Demi Moore, John Cusack, Mandy Patinkin, Kathy Bates, and nearly 20 others, actors whose careers Rob Reiner had helped shape. It was the kind of memorial most people never see in their lifetime. But here is what made the story even more haunting. Carol O'Connor, the man who had reportedly clashed with Rob Reiner for years, had lost his own son, Hugh, to tragedy 3 decades earlier. Hugh O'Connor was also 32 years old when he died. He had also battled addiction for most of his life. 2 fathers, 2 sons, the same age, the same disease, and the same unbearable ending. Separated by 30 years. Hold on to that detail, because by the time this story is over, it will change how you see everything that came before. You'll understand what happened between Carol O'Connor and Rob Reiner. You have to understand who each of them was before they ever set foot on the same stage. Carol O'Connor was born in New York City in 1924. He came up the hard way, through small theater roles, bit parts, years of grinding work with no guarantee of breakthrough. By the time he was cast as Archie Bunker in 1971, he was 46 years old. He had already spent decades learning his craft. He was meticulous. He was opinionated. He believed deeply that he understood the character of Archie Bunker better than anyone, including the writers. He was probably right. From the very first episode, O'Connor rewrote scripts in pencil, recorded himself playing every role on a tape recorder, and handed the tapes to producers. He once rewrote the entire pilot before anyone could stop him. Norman Lear, the show's creator, called their working relationship murderously difficult at times. But Lear also admitted that O'Connor's Archie Bunker was so brilliant, so alive, so searingly real, that he could have kissed his feet after every performance. O'Connor was a perfectionist who wore his intensity like armor. He didn't separate work from emotion. He didn't coast. Every scene was a battle, and he wanted it fought the right way. Robert Reiner was born a generation later, March 6, 1947, in the Bronx, New York. His father was Carl Reiner, one of the most celebrated comedic minds in American television history. Rob grew up surrounded by show business. He grew up around Mel Brooks, Sid Caesar, and a world where wit was currency and laughter was the highest form of intelligence. By the time he arrived on the set of All in the Family in 1971, he was 23 years old. He was energetic, outspoken, and deeply progressive in his politics, qualities that made him a natural fit for Michael Meathead Stivic, the young liberal who constantly butted heads with his father-in-law. What the cameras captured was electric. What happened off camera was more complicated. All in the Family premiered on CBS in January 1971. Audiences were not sure what to make of it. The show opened with Archie Bunker saying things that had never been said on American primetime television before. Racial slurs, generational contempt, a kind of angry, bitter smallness of spirit that was somehow both repellent and uncomfortably familiar. It made people uneasy. It also made them laugh. And it made them watch. Within a year, it was the most watched show in America. For 5 consecutive years, it held that position. No drama, no thriller, no network spectacle could touch it. And at the center of it was the war between Archie Bunker and Meathead. Carroll O'Connor played Archie as if the character were made of real skin and real resentment, the kind that builds over decades in a man who feels the world has passed him by. Rob Reiner played Mike Stivic as the equally stubborn counterweight, the young man who believed passionately in change and couldn't understand why his father-in-law couldn't see what was so obvious. The tension was undeniable. The chemistry was undeniable. Together, they were television history. But the tension didn't stop at the edge of the set. O'Connor was 2 decades older than Reiner. He had come to Archie Bunker after years of struggle, years of near misses and grinding work. Reiner had come to Meathead as a young man with famous parents and a certain ease about the entertainment world that O'Connor had never had and never would have. O'Connor could be difficult to work with. His colleagues and producers said so openly. He fought for creative control at every turn. He rewrote dialogue. He challenged directors. He was, by multiple accounts, not easy to share stage with. Rob Reiner was not a quiet presence either. He was opinionated, vocal, and unafraid to speak his mind, on set and off it. For years, the question circulated in Hollywood circles. Did Carroll O'Connor genuinely dislike Rob Reiner? Was there real animosity beneath the fictional hatred of Archie for Meathead? The answer, as it turned out, was more layered than a simple yes or no. People who worked on the show described their relationship as professional but frictional. Not a deep personal feud, but a constant low-level tension born of 2 very strong personalities occupying the same creative space, with very different histories and very different ways of showing up. O'Connor's world was one of discipline, hard-won knowledge, and painstaking craft. Reiner was younger, less burdened by those battles, and more comfortable with improvisation and instinct. Those differences showed up in the work. And sometimes those differences showed up in silences between takes. And yet, there were moments that cut through all of it. In one of the show's most celebrated episodes, Two's a Crowd, Archie and Mike are accidentally locked in a bar storeroom overnight. They have no choice but to talk. Really talk. And what emerges, in dialogue that O'Connor revealed was largely improvised in the moment, is one of the most moving scenes in the history of American television. Archie tells Mike about his childhood, about his father, about the pain that was handed to him before he ever had a choice about who to become. Rob Reiner later said there was no acting in that scene, just 2 men saying goodbye to 8 years together. I looked at Carroll, he said, and, saying goodbye to him after 8 years of having worked with him, that was pretty easy to do. All of your emotions just come out. Whatever friction had existed between them, it was not the whole story. It never is. Reiner left the show in 1978, and when he walked out of that storm for the last time, the tears were real. After All in the Family, Rob Reiner reinvented himself. He stepped behind the camera, and what he built that would define the second half of his life. This is Spinal Tap in 1984, Stand By Me in 1986, The Princess Bride in 1987, When Harry Met Sally in 1989, Misery in 1990, A Few Good Men in 1992, one after another, genre after genre, each one landing with a certainty that signaled this was not a lucky streak. This was a filmmaker of the first order. He earned 9 Golden Globe nominations. He was honored at Lincoln Center. 3 of his films were inducted into the National Film Registry. He received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. By almost any measure, the kid Carroll O'Connor had butted heads with on set, had become one of the most accomplished directors of his generation. Carroll O'Connor continued acting, most notably in The Heat of Night, where he played Police Chief Bill Gillespie through the 1980s and 1990s. The show gave him creative control. It also gave him something else. It gave him a place to put his son. Hugh O'Connor joined the cast of In the Heat of the Night, playing a young officer working alongside his father's character. O'Connor wrote episodes for Hugh. He gave him storylines. He kept him close. Because Hugh was struggling, had been struggling for years. Drugs had hollowed out a young man who had every gift, looks, talent, a famous father who loved him, and still couldn't escape the pull of addiction. On March 28, 1995, Hugh called his father to say goodbye. Carol O'Connor could hear it in his voice. He was powerless to stop it. Moments later, Hugh took his own life. He was 32 years old. Carol O'Connor never recovered from it, not fully. He turned his grief into action. He publicly named the drug dealer he believed had contributed to his son's death. He campaigned for California's Drug Dealer Liability Act. He appeared on television to speak about addiction in a way that no celebrity had spoken about it before, without distance, without polish, just a raw, open wound of father who could not save his child. There isn't a day, he told Larry King, that I don't think of him and want him back. Carol O'Connor died in 2001 of a heart attack. He was 76 years old. He carried the loss of Hugh with him until the end. Rob Reiner carried his own version of this weight in silence for years. His son Nick had struggled with substance abuse and mental illness since early adulthood. In 2015, Rob and Nick co-created a semi-autobiographical film called Being Charlie, the story of a young man in rehab and the father who cannot save him. It was, in retrospect, as close to a confession as public life allows. The father wanted to understand. The father wanted to reach his son through story, through art, through the only language he had ever fully trusted. It did not work. The morning of December 14th, 2025, began like any other in Brentwood, California. By midday, everything had changed. Romy Reiner, Rob and Michelle's youngest daughter, found her parents in their home. She called emergency services. By the time responders arrived, both Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner were gone. They had been killed with sharp force injuries, stabbed in their own home, in the neighborhood where they had built their life together. Nick Reiner was arrested later that day. He was 32 years old, the same age as Hugh O'Connor had been when he died. Nick was taken to the Twin Towers Correctional Facility in Los Angeles. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He has pleaded not guilty. He has been denied bail. His case is ongoing, with hearings scheduled to continue into late 2026. Rob and Michelle's 2 other children, Jake and Romy, released a joint statement the following day. They called their parents their best friends. They asked for privacy. They asked for compassion, for speculation to be tempered, for their parents to be remembered for the lives they lived and the love they gave. Hollywood responded with the kind of collective grief that only arrives when someone truly irreplaceable is gone. Billy Crystal, who had known Rob Reiner since appearing on All in the Family, since the day Reiner turned to him and said, "It was fun playing your best friend. Why don't we just keep doing that?" stood at the podium of the 98th Academy Awards in March 2026 and delivered a tribute that silenced a room full of people who had seen everything. "The films of my friend Rob will live on forever," Crystal said, "because they were about what makes us laugh and cry, and about what we aspire to be, better, kinder, funnier, and more human." Then nearly 20 actors walked out onto the Dolby Theater stage. Meg Ryan, Kathy Bates, John Cusack, Demi Moore, Mandy Patinkin, Carrie Elwes, Will Wheaton, Christopher Guest. They stood in a line. They did not say a word. They did not need to S.O. Here is what we know now. Carol O'Connor was not simply a difficult man who disliked his younger co-star. He was a father who understood, in a way that few people understand from the inside, that talent, love, resources, and attention are sometimes not enough. That the child in front of you can be slipping away while you are standing right there, watching, helpless. He had lived it. Rob Reiner had lived it too. Quietly, publicly, only in the way artists are public about private pain. Through their work, through a film that named the wound without quite exposing it. The friction between O'Connor and Reiner on the set of All in the Family was real. Creative people collide when they're both strong-willed, when they carry different histories, when they have different ways of fighting for what they believe is true. But beneath that friction, invisible to cameras, unspoken in interviews. Two men were quietly carrying the same impossible weight. Both had sons who were drowning. Both had tried everything they knew to pull them back. Both would eventually lose them. Carroll O'Connor lost Hugh in 1995 and spent 6 more years living with that grief before his own death. Rob Reiner lost his life to the very tragedy he had been quietly circling for decades. There's a scene from All in the Family, the scene O'Connor and Reiner largely improvised together, where Archie Bunker talks about his father, about the poison that gets into a family system and gets passed on. He says it plainly, like a man who has carried it for so long he's no longer ashamed of the weight. In light of everything that came after, that scene lands differently now. Two men, improvising, telling each other a truth neither of them could yet name. The poison had not been passed to them by their fathers, but it found its way in all the same. Rob Reiner spent 8 years fighting with Carroll O'Connor on screen, and somewhere in that fight, they built something that outlasted both of them. The films Rob left behind will be watched long after the headlines have faded. And the story of these two men, bound together by more than a television set, is still being written in courtrooms and in grief and in the memories of everyone they touched. So here's the question this story leaves us with. When we hear that two people clashed, that someone supposedly hated someone else, how often are we missing what was really happening underneath? What do you think? Did you know the full story of Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner? Did this change how you see their relationship? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're new here, this channel is dedicated to the stories behind the stories, the ones that don't fit in a headline. Consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next.